Greetings, this is Griff Ruby. My topic here is going to be a somewhat simpler one. It has to do with why people would be afraid of being sedevacantist. Now, I say this in the shadow of a very great video with a very similar title recently released by Father Chicada. I think he did an excellent job. I think it's really wonderful. He makes an awful lot of really, really good points. And as for what can I do for that? Well, I think there's a few points that probably could be enlarged on just a little bit. A few interesting points that might make them a little more interesting or come alive for some people. And then I think I've got some of my own thoughts also in addition to what he's got. So there's stuff we need to overcome, that's for sure. So if anyone who's seen that might realize that one of the first things he talks about is tribal myths. That's his way of describing when all this crazy stuff started happening in the 1960s, people didn't know what in the world to make of it. And such things as, have we lost the Pope were pretty much the kind of question that was seen as being above everybody's pay grade. So rather than get into that, we start saying, well, do we always have to obey a Pope? Or maybe only when he's speaking infallibly. So that got kind of ventured as an idea. Of course, it doesn't help that in the Novus Ordo religion, that's part of their belief, is that only something that they call infallible have to be followed. The rest doesn't have to be. So that's already their belief. But that can't be our belief, because Catholic popes aren't just to be followed in one or two infallible things that might come out a century, but in everything that, in what they do and what they teach. And even if there might be some instances where something they say might not be considered infallible because it's a little maybe beyond the domain of faith and morals, or in some ways is a less settled question. It's not about what's true or false, but maybe what's more prudential or more wise or reasonable course, especially like in how to deal with the world or how to relate to it. There's some area of, doubt and uncertainty there where things could still be, there's a little bit of room for that. Nowhere near enough to account for what we see today, but there would be enough to account for things like the disagreements that happened over the years, for say the Galileo crisis, or such questions as whether or not collecting interest is sinful. And there are some things where ideas that were taught at one time were, they were authoritatively confirmed, but not infallibly and therefore irrevocably confirmed. So, but, they would try to find room in that, or there would be what he called the bad dad mentality. And I like what he has on there, this picture. He puts it on there. There's this dad talking on his phone, yada, yada, yada. And behind him, there's these two kids. I guess that's supposed to be his sons or something, just sitting there playing on the railroad tracks, literally not caring. The only thing that lacked was a train coming, but, I guess you work with what you got, and it conveys the idea well enough. Of course, as we know, that doesn't hold up. I have my own thoughts about bad dad notion. I might as well go about it. To me, that's a dad who's merely neglectful. But you got to remember, ever since Paul VI, we have been dealing with more than merely somebody who's neglectful. We're actually dealing with someone who actively labors to destroy the faith of Catholics. So this isn't, a bad dad who's looking the other way while the train's coming and run over his kids. This is more like somebody who's probably driving that train and hoping they don't get off the track before they get hit. Okay? That's kind of more like what we got. I would think of it as sort of like, imagine someone so creepy as to be willing to molest their own child. Now, I would add to what he has to say. There are those who kind of deal with the modernists, through the motu proprio, before that, various indults. I would equate that as somebody who says, well, I'll bring in 3 of my friends and you can molest them if you promise, and I won't tell the police or anybody about it as long as you don't molest me. Do we have a deal? And he says, all right, you have a deal. So, that's a pretty wicked way to go, even if at least you do go unmolested. Have to give it that much. Or you could take the recognize and resist mentality that just says, well, even though I think, you would have the right to do all these things, I'm not going to let you molest me. If you want to punish me for for my not letting you, molest me. That's okay. I don't care. Do what you like. I'm still your child, though I have to wonder, what we have in common. Maybe I'm adopted. I don't know. That's the recognize and resist position. And then what's the Sedevacantist position would be like, there's no family resemblance. You can't be my father. Obviously, I'm adopted, and you're not my father, Mr. Molester, and I don't want to live under your roof anymore. And in fact, I'm going to go to the the adoption panel, and then report you to them because I think that they will pull you out of your house and put me somewhere else. You see? And then, of course, there's my own position that I've advocated so many places, which is sort of like being able to say to this person, I know you're not my father because I have found my true parents. They want me, they love me, and, they're ready to take me, and that's where I'm going, And they even told me about how you kidnapped me when I was a baby, which is entirely consistent with everything I know. So I'm going back to them, and, there's the happy ending. Why? Because, of course, not only is the Vatican organization not the real church, and its leader not a real pope, but obviously, by definition, by dogma, the church really exists. The real church really has to exist, and therefore does. And it's visible, which means it's discoverable. It really exists. That being the case, you have but to find it, join it, and never look back. And never have to worry about that other place where you were staying with the kidnappers who tried to molest you all this time. You don't have to be in there anymore or even think about all that anymore. It's time to really, really move on and get on with one's spiritual life. So that would be my one thought on that one. Now he mentions, kind of relating back to the only that which is infallible matters, he brings up the points about some of those who follow Father Feeney, for example. And you kind of realize in there you do have a precedent of people who are long accustomed to the idea that the church has been teaching errors and heresies from the very beginning, you see. You got baptism of blood and desire. Good grief. Same Bible that said, only he who was born of water and spirit can be, go to heaven. And John also says in Matthew 10 that he who professes Christ before man, Christ shall profess before the Father. No condition of baptism. Or again, elsewhere in Matthew, Jesus says, he who loses his life for my sake shall find it. No condition about baptism. So you've got the errors of baptism of blood and desire extending literally all the way back to the Holy Bible. So, you find it again in the ancient fathers who, wherever they actually talk about these things, they never deny them. They always support them where these things come up. And then you have, a smattering of popes who have made references. And again, always favorable. And then again, you have countless saints who have always spoken in favor of these things. You have countless theologians, the doctors of the church, and all without any criticism from the church. Oh, but the church was wrong to allow this to go on. And then they'll say, well, how could they do that? Well, it's just a tiny speculation. It's like somebody saying the puppy dog, can live immortally if loved by a saint in heaven, and that kind of speculation. That, you see what I mean? But it's not that. It's not that at all. This is a serious matter of, whether people are saved or lost, and whether God is just or not. And even if you could say, well, God in his justice can do whatever he wants, and that's true, but justice would be meaningless if whatever he wants, still meant that those who loved him could go to hell. So, anyway, if you get used to the idea that the church could just be wrong, can teach error and just do so for a protracted period of time, then I suppose, the recognize and resist also becomes a much easier sell. So I think he raises a good point about that, And he must, okay, what about the Fatima? Well, how's the Pope going to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary if you don't have a Pope? Well, the answer to that's simple. One day there'll be a Pope again, and then you can just do it. Okay, but Father brings out, I think, an excellent point too, that strictly speaking, that's a private revelation anyway. So that's an important thing. So if all that never happened, it's not like we've disproved anything. So then, of course, he brings up another point about cowardice and human respect. What are you going to tell Aunt Helen? And, of course, the most important part, and kind of corollary to that, the marketability. It's always easier to sound like you're with the Pope, even if the guy's, not even a Catholic, not even a Christian, really. It's easier to raise money for this new seminary you want to build or some cathedral or something than it is to say, yes, we're Catholics, so we, of course, have nothing to do with those guys because we are Catholics and we'd like to build a seminary. Would you be willing to, help the church by sending some donations? And historically, he's correct in that it has been easier to raise the money in the other way than by being openly Sedevacantist. But I think we have to supplement that by saying the tide is turning on that one. While you probably could still raise more money that way than the other way, as I say this now, I think time will come soon enough, and most of us will see that a time when you really could raise more money, but wanting to build a Sedevacantist seminary than you could building a non-Sedevacantist seminary. I think that time is coming and will be very soon. So that's just something. It's something worth putting to the test. And maybe once that happens, that could be a very important threshold for Sedevacantism itself, as far as catching on. So I think he brings up a lot of very interesting and really fascinating points. And I don't think he says the wrong thing in the whole thing. And it's great so far as it goes. And as you can see, some of these points he makes, I think, can be enlarged upon a little bit. That's kind of interesting. But now that's the first part. The second part has to do with, there's still one other kind of reason, is that why does it sometimes seem as if becoming a Sedevacantist has to mean coming to believe strange things about the church itself? Sometimes we know we can come to our Sedevacantist priest for a real mass, for good preaching, for good catechesis. We know we can come, for a good place to go or send our children, to become priests or monks or nuns. You see, we know these things, and yet at the same time, why then does it seem like when we want to learn a little bit about ecclesiology, we get told stuff that's got nothing to do with classical texts of ecclesiology? We want to understand the church. We want to understand the situation. We want to understand how all this is going on. What do we hear? It's the end of the world, the great apostasy. Well, okay, can you find Antichrist yet? Or you take the other tack of, it's all a conspiracy, the Masons or, whatever, the Bilderbergers, the Jews, the CFR, you name it. Some cluster of secret bad guys out there, none of whom is ever identifiable by name, of course, is out to destroy the church, and they made all this nonsense happen. Those kind of bad guys have always existed and always trying to make that kind of stuff happen. The real question really should be to focus on is, why are they now suddenly being allowed to succeed? Well, it all has to do with where that success really is. I've discussed that elsewhere, so I'm not going to dwell on that now. But, or alternatively, let's say if you don't get that, but maybe you really do try to look up some real classical texts on ecclesiology, but there's no application, no sensible application, or canon law. What do you learn about canon law? Well, you hear about Canon 188 number 4 that shows that if a person is a heretic, they obviously have automatically, tacitly resigned from any and all offices, ipso facto. Which is true, yeah, that's one canon. Or you might hear, when some particular cleric is pressed to explain his ministry, he might bring out Canon 209 about supplied jurisdiction. And are we supposed to believe that every Catholic cleric that passes for a real Catholic cleric, is doing so on the basis of nothing but Canon 209? Is that what the entire hierarchy of the church is comprised of today? That's what they seem to be suggesting. And then it gets worse. They'll say, they'll act like the church doesn't exist anymore. One day, some pope spoke a heresy, stopped being pope, and poof, there's nobody anywhere. There's nothing. Or they'll talk like, well, since there's no authority today. You see that phrase all the time. Now you pin them down and say, oh, well, no, I mean, certainly there must be authority somewhere, but nobody knows where it is, so there's no authority. And excuse me, but anyone who learns some real ecclesiology from the standard classical text they learn about infallibility of the Pope. Okay, Sedevacantists got this one down pretty well. Okay, good for you on that. They'll learn about indefectibility of the church. Well, now, if they're acting like the church doesn't really exist, even while they're actually functioning as it, go figure. That's kind of an odd one, or they're kind of saying, well, look what's happened to the church, no, that's not the church, but if you think it is, you're really saying the church is defected. Okay, so that's already, and then you'll learn about the authority of the church. Well, what did I say? Nobody could find any authority anywhere, so well, that's not a very convincing ecclesiology. And then you'll read about the visibility of the church. Well, that's one that they want to shy away with, and they shouldn't have to. And then you hear about the marks of the church, and well, you obviously can't apply the marks of the church to the Vatican apparatus. So what can you apply them to? What society fulfills those marks? Doctrine tells us that there must always be some society that does so. And the Vatican apparatus, is obviously not it. But they act as if, well, since they're not it, it's as if, well, why look anywhere at all? I guess there's nobody. Well, no, look, seek, and ye shall find, you really shall, if you really seek. So, should it have to be that way? I don't think so. I mean, the Sedevacante finding itself is too obvious to deny. You're literally trying to tell me, that this is a car, I'm sorry, but it's not. The Vatican leader is not a pope, and this piece of paper is not an automobile. Okay? It's that obvious, cut and dry. But that being the case, we shouldn't have to throw away any Catholic belief, even the doctrines the church has about itself. And I am a firm believer that we don't need to throw away any of that. All of it holds true, if only we know where to look. And that's something I really think we need to focus on a lot more. Because if we only stress this, we're talking about where the church isn't, we may accidentally end up conveying, if we Sedevacantists just talk about where the church isn't, namely it isn't the Vatican apparatus, and its leader isn't a pope and so forth, that really leaves one sounding like maybe we said that the church isn't. And, that can't be true. You need to focus on where the church is. Going back to my illustration with the molested daughter or adopted daughter or pseudo-kidnapped, pseudo-adopted daughter, let's find our true parents. And then that's right there frees us from the whole dirty situation in the first place. Thank you.